and stress and pressure and stress. So this really set me up to talk personally about it. So welcome to the webinar. I think we're ready to roll. Before we get started, I want to welcome, talk a little bit about our why and welcome our guest speaker. So I'm going to welcome our guest speaker first. So Kevin McGarry is on with us today to share some ideas and some content about his own coaching, as well as the work that he's been doing at the master level and now the doctoral level in terms of high performance and achievement and how those two connect. So I tried to print Kevin's bio. I couldn't do that, so I'm going to talk about Kevin. So Kevin and I go way, way, way back. Kevin was a leader at Nationwide Financial when I was in charge of the coaching program, and Kevin was actually my client. And then Kevin went through the programs at Nationwide. We had a core, we had an advanced, and they had a master's at the time. And Kevin went through the master's program, graduated with distinction at Middlesex University with his master's thesis that he's going to talk about today. So welcome, Kevin. Thank you so much. And thank you for the patience with trying to figure out how we navigate this. So, you know, we want this to be a coaching conversation, and that's why Kevin is on today. And you'll see for the subsequent Friday calls that we have, we want to make them conversational. We want to help you sharpen your saw about coaching and in the area of your own coaching and how you develop yourself as a coach, then maybe how you actually coach and lead, and then how does this apply to your organization as well. So my goal is that you walk away with one idea, just one idea from today. And if you walk away with more, we more than achieved our goal, Kevin, thinking about achievement, and that you have tools and resources for growth and development. So back to our housekeeping, okay? We've got Q&A to post questions. Just a little reminder, everyone can see your questions. So the questions will be answered during the Q&A. We've put 5 Q&As in the program, and your questions will be answered during the Q&A. And if for some reason we don't get to all the questions, we'll post the answers at Global IOC LinkedIn page. So make sure you follow us, and we will be populating the Communities of Practice tab over the next several weeks. So there's some things in there now that are starting to show up. The blog is showing up. We'll have a newsletter and Communities of Practice. We'll also have thought leadership. And by the way, Kevin's has a, what would you call it, Kevin? A review of your thesis.
An executive summary of it.
Yeah, it's an awesome executive summary, and it's going to be posted. It should be showing up right now in our Communities of Practice. So Kevin, thank you for that. So let's dig in. I know we're running a little bit late, so let's start. So when I talked to Kevin, I said, you know, we really have to perform under pressure, or do we? What does that look like? So how do we perform under pressure and as well as cultivate peak performance? And so the first section we're going to talk about is what does that look like in terms of performing under pressure? So Performing Under Pressure is actually a book, I think it's just Perform Under Pressure, and it's by Weisinger and Pauly. And they talk about pressure because we think we need pressure. Now, interestingly enough, Kevin sent me a question this morning, and he said, what's the difference between pressure and stress? And so I went, okay, so my master's thesis, my first master's thesis way, way, way back when, was on stress and cholesterol levels. And the way we defined stress at the time was by the definition by the father of stress, who is Hans Selye. So he did the formidable early research around stress. And he says that stress is the body's response to any demand made upon it. Okay, so cold could be a demand made upon the body. So stress is a response, okay? When we look at pressure, the way the authors describe pressure is when the outcome matters, okay? So today when I was trying to get everybody, Kevin and I on the call, his camera wouldn't show up, and we actually have been working on it 15 minutes before the call started. We couldn't get the camera going, and the outcome was important. And the more we tried and failed, the more stressed I became. I could feel that in my body. So the outcome is important. The outcome is uncertain. We didn't know, could we get this camera going? And in my mind, I'm thinking, what are we going to do? How are we going to get Kevin showing? And Kevin has some really important things to say, and I want you to be able to see him. So the outcome is important. The outcome is uncertain. And most importantly, and this one's big, you're being judged on the outcome. So I'm sure some of you, as you're waiting, are going, what are these two clowns doing? You know, we're waiting for a webinar and they're not showing up. Are they late? Did they oversleep? So we get in, we think people are saying that. The fact of the matter is, more than likely, nobody was saying that. But those three things distinguish pressure from stress, because there is a thing called eustress, which is good stress. So I want us to move the conversation now into pressure is the enemy of success. So you could see the harder we tried to be successful, the less success we were having. And so that pressure was creating an enemy. So I have a hand raised. Christy, let me stop for a moment. Is there a problem? I don't see a hand raised. Sorry, Christy. Can you put it in Q&A? So pressure adversely impacts our cognitive success. So that pressure was, we were trying to think through a response, but we couldn't get to it because we're like, well, try this, try that. So it was impacting our linear thinking. It downgrades our behavioral skills. In pressure moments, people perform below their capacity. So as I was feeling that stress, to be able to create an outcome, positive outcome for you all, my behavior was going down. So a lot of times people camouflage pressure. I'm not under pressure, but we're feeling it, but we're not experiencing it. So that's kind of the suppression of it. And people, oh my gosh, Polly wrote this book probably 8 years ago. We used it at Nationwide for leader development, and that people feel increased pressure in their lives. So don't we feel increased pressure in our lives? Pressure disrupts what we value most. So the more pressure we feel, the more likely, we're feeling that intensity, and it interferes with our relationships, our careers, and sometimes it can really interfere with our ethics. And people who handle pressure better than most do not rise to the occasion, or more importantly, statistically perform better than non-pressure situations. So if pressure isn't good for us and stress could be good for us, how do we help people think through that continuum? So now we look at, from the research, some components of peak performance. So when we are performing in a peak way, we have cognitive, emotional, and psychological areas that we want to focus on. So when we're cognitively functioning at our very best, we're able to concentrate, we're able to focus, we're able to perceive the things that we're experiencing as challenging, yet we can be excited about it. There wasn't one cell in my body that was excited about solving this issue with Zoom, with the exception of wanting it to be a good experience for you. So there wasn't excitement, there was that it was difficult. And in that, the positive self-talk. So you can see with pressure, all of that stops. So we've got to move ourselves into, okay, what can we gain from this, okay? And the best thing for me is knowing that Kevin's a really good guy and he wasn't going to get upset about the fact that I was this was not working the way it was supposed to. Emotionally, we need to have confidence. We have to have interest in the task. Kevin's going to talk a lot about that later on. We need to feel in control, and we call that agency. Like, I have a sense of control over what's going on, a determination and a commitment. So that emotional piece is really going to show up as Kevin talks about motivation. And then psychologically, can we steady our body? Do we do a few deep breaths to get back into a little bit of calm? Do we slow our voice down? Can we slow our heartbeat? And so levels of perspiration and breathing, all of those increase when we're feeling the pressure. So we have to coach people then to think about, what does it look like to move into components of peak performance, out of pressure into those components of peak performance. So I'm gonna stop right there for Q&A. And Kevin, give me your thoughts about when we are talking about, you've observed salespeople in a lot of situations. They've been under stress and they've been under pressure. So tell me what some insights you've seen in coaching people.
And if I look from a coaching standpoint, I think the environment of pressure changes, right? It depends on, market pressures. Are they impacting your overall sales pipeline? You look at the uncertainty, even in today's COVID, environment of, is the company, the corporation going to sustain, through this economic downturn, and will they be able to come out in a very positive way? So there's that inherent pressure of the organization. But then you have personal pressures as well, which I've seen more recently, which is homeschooling children, right? That becomes an added pressure of how do you do that effectively and do your job and on a regular basis. But there's also the pressures of a spouse or a child and in individual personal dynamics that happen. And as a sales leader, what I've seen is, those pressures really do impact overall sales performance. I'll give you just an example that I saw maybe a couple of years back. I was coaching one of my associates, sales associates, who historically has been really, really solid, a top performer on an ongoing basis. But I saw performance start to slip. And there was pressure. You could see that pressure was mounting on him on a regular basis. He was adding it to himself, the stress on top of it. And as a coach, it becomes, can we uncover what those pressures are and to truly help the sales associate come through it? I did something, and Peggy, you and I think I actually have talked about this in the past. I did something very different. I took the sales associate who had a full day for travel for the two of us. I could tell in the conversation, the pressure and the stress was just mounting. I said, look, cancel your day. I just cancel it. Let's go play golf. And I literally started the entire day with reviewing his past successes, helping him explain, what he felt like through those successes, how he accomplished those things. And then over the course of the conversation, it was, he opened up to talk about some of his personal struggles that were impacting his work life. So that work-life balance is so important. And the pressure to really walk away with not just mounting pressure if I can't get it done, I can't accomplish the goal, but we set specific short-term time frames for him to achieve, which then really kind of structured his next month, 2 months, and he felt like each day, each week, he was accomplishing something, and that pressure lifted, and he was able to perform at a much higher level. So it's pressure, stress, it truly does impact, I think, the level of success and performance that you'll see from a sales associate.
I love that response. And it makes me think about in Performance Under Pressure, the book that we're talking about, that we're taking some of the material from. He talks about we have a working memory and a procedural memory. And the more stressed we become, the more distracted we become, the more difficult it is for us to be able to focus and pull that working memory forward. So another good example of, let's just stop where we are, right? And let's not have that be a problem. So love it, Kevin. So let's move on to the what we talk about: discretionary effort, performance motivation, and discretionary effort. So we all want to think about, what does that going above and beyond mean for our direct employees or for the people we work with? How does that factor in, and what does that look like? And so my master's thesis at Middlesex was on going above and beyond a discretionary effort, because I believe that coaching leads to discretionary effort. And so, but to get to discretionary effort, you really have to be thinking about how that person's motivated. Are they intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated? So both of these work for discretionary effort. So intrinsically, when I think about intrinsic, I think focus on the words competence, autonomy, which includes the sense of choice. Meaningfulness is the passion for the work. And when we look at extrinsic, we think about what's the reward, the contingency between what I do. It could be negative or positive, but the contingency between what I do and what I receive. And then we also looked a little bit at organizational commitment. So let's look at what those antecedents are to going above and beyond. So think about these for your own organization, for your own leadership, for your own coaching. So the first thing is my leader doing it? Okay. If my leader is not going above and beyond, there's a high likelihood that I'm not going to go above and beyond. Secondarily, what does my leader expect from me? So if my leader expects average performance and that's good, there's a certain amount of complacency that's allowed, then that's what's going to happen. This is simply what we call Pygmalion. The Pygmalion theory of behavior is if you expect people to rise to a certain level, they will rise. And the research is all these kindergarten classes that get a new teacher in first grade. And how they do this research is phenomenal because the first grade teacher does not know what was going on with the kindergarten class. Well, they are the lowest performers given to the new teacher and told that they were the highest performers and don't let them fail. And in every study, you can do a fact check on this. It's Pygmalion. Look at on the internet. There's so many studies. I'm fascinated that they are able to do this. But after a year, the lowest performers are now the highest performers. And so it's our expectations for our coach in our coaching and those that we lead that determine the person's behavior. The relationship matters. My dissertation was on what are the critical incidents that lead to successful coaching. The number one over all of the factors was the relationship. If you don't have a relationship with someone, they're probably not going to give that discretionary effort unless we're into the extrinsic motivation you're paying them to do it. Your leadership style. Are you autocratic? Are you transformational? You know, all of the research from Gallup, and we look at the Gallup 12, that people want to be recognized and they want people and they want leaders to develop them. So if your leadership style is one of development, then it changes that expectation as well, and it changes what is provided from a behavior. The motivational power of the role. It comes back to intrinsic, and do I have a purpose? Do I like what I do? Is what I'm doing, does it matter? So does that motivation of what I do matters to somebody besides me? Does the culture support me doing what I love doing? We've already talked about intrinsic motivation. Kevin's going to talk about the need for achievement, but do I have a need for achievement? So if I want to achieve and I set high goals, then I am going to give a little more discretionary effort. You know, what's my career stage? Am I the beginning or the end? And so we really have to work hard with people in mid-stage. There's been a lot of research, even some of the master's thesis that we were doing at Nationwide and continuing on with, what do we need to do with people at mid-stage? We kind of go, we really prep them up in the beginning and then we prepare them for leaving. But what are we doing with these folks in the mid-stage to help them really engage and stay engaged? What's the organization and work commitment? Am I committed to staying with the organization? And am I committed to the work I'm doing? And if those are both positive, I'm more than likely going to give discretionary effort. And then what's the work mood? Do I work with a group of people that hate their jobs and they come to work and they complain and they awfulize all the time? And if the work mood makes it hard for me to be upbeat and positive, it's going to be challenging for me to go forward with that discretionary effort. We're going to stop for Q&A with Kevin, but I want you all to know that this is your opportunity to think about what we're talking about and share some of your own questions or maybe even some of your own ideas. So Kevin, you've worked in a lot of cultures, okay? So how does that cultural influence impact the discretionary effort that's delivered?
Yeah, I think, and Peggy, you and I have talked in the past. My career, I've been at different firms, and the culture at those firms has been almost stark contrast to one another. One was a Midwestern organization, the other was a New York-based organization. And you kind of think of what does that highly competitive New York culture look like versus more of a collaborative environment in maybe a slower Midwestern type organization. And what I found is it really made an impact on discretionary effort, where when you think of an organization and a culture that it's by taking risks, you're rewarded for taking individual risks and doing the extra work for a high level of success, versus having a much more collaborative organization that is structured as not one individual kind of has ownership of a goal or an expectation. It's more collaborative. It's do people kind of rally together to work towards that, or are you discretionary effort knowing that taking a higher level of risk you can get more reward for that? It kind of comes into the culture as well of what does it look like just a working environment. One organization I happen to be a part of offered free lunches and free dinners, and what that did is it gave people that incentive to give a little extra discretionary effort and continue on with their workday, versus another organization where the culture was people left at 4 o'clock and there was really no added reward or benefit to stay to 4:15 or 4:30. And so that level of culture drive to add that discretionary effort, if it's not seen and rewarded, or at least acknowledged at the leadership level for the associate, makes a big impact on whether or not they'll actually proceed and do that as well.
Exactly. So there you go. Shadow of the leader is what we say shortly in that space. So I'm seeing hands raised, but I'm not seeing questions. So if you've got a question, can you put it in Q&A? So then I can ask Kevin, or we can respond together. So Monique asked, how does distance from the decision-making power impact discretionary effort? Okay. And so I'm going to start with it, Kevin, and then I want you to follow up. But when we look at, if I love what I'm doing, and if my direct leader is transformational, the distance will not matter unless what the distance creates is a dissonance for me between what I love doing, how I'm doing it, and if it impacts how then my leader relates to me. It will have a little impact on organizational culture, but I see these leadership styles and motivational power of what I do, expectations from my direct leader, and what my direct leader is doing is having a lot more impact than what's happening. So Kevin, how would you answer distance from the decision, the power?
Yeah, I would look at the distance from decision-making power is really the decision to do that little extra work, to have that discretionary effort. Whether you're making a large corporate decision that's going to revolutionize the organization, or if your discretionary effort is going to move your department or your group just a little bit further ahead. I'll give you an example. I think the leader makes a huge impact. Individuals, I think, take cues from their leaders on what is expected and what the discretionary effort looks like. So I'll give you an example, a conversation I had just the last couple of weeks as you look at sales professionals. So I was talking to a top sales performer in this new virtual environment. Their firm was asking them, you need to do 12 calls a day every day. And this top performer already did that. She had a question for her manager, who had been kind of mandating this, you need 12 calls a day. Called at 3 o'clock to talk to her manager, who described the bike ride that he was on with his family, and he was on an extended bike ride. It was a really long bike ride. Her response was, what kind of discretionary effort do I want to put in if I'm being asked to do something, but yet my leader is taking a 2-hour, 3-hour bike ride in the middle of the day? So what you do as a leader is be that shadow of the leader. What do you want individuals to do? They're going to emulate you. And if you're putting in the extra effort, regardless of how far you are from a decision point, it really matters at the leadership level. Can you get a little extra discretionary effort from an individual associate?
Thank you, Kevin. That is such a good example. And we have one more question and then we'll move on. And that is, how does good stress contribute to high performance? So, when I think about eustress and Hans Selye's definition of the way you respond. So remember, you're choosing to respond. Now, you might have an emotional response that you go, whoa, and then you have to control that. But then, if we go back to, can I get excited about the work that I'm doing. And yes, are we willing to put in a couple extra hours because we're working on the outcome because we're so excited to see the project finished, or we might be able to gain this client. So it's the optimism that's part of stress that takes us into it being good stress versus the pessimism of looking at the stressor. So when I used to teach stress management at the University of Dayton, I used to say that it's not the stressor, it's what you say about the stressor. So the answer to this question is, it's good stress if you say it's good stress. It's bad stress if you say it's bad stress. So it's your interpretation of the event, because two people can be sitting side by side, okay? You can have two people driving in traffic and one person wigging out because it's going too slow, and another person excited because they've got a book and they want to finish it while they're still in traffic. So the idea of stress is your personal interpretation. Kevin, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would really agree with your comments and the fact that stress, it comes down to, are you an optimist or a pessimist? How are you looking at that stress? Are you looking at it as an opportunity to increase and push yourself to the next level? Or are you looking at it as fear and it's going to pull you back and you're not going to be able to accomplish your goals? And being able to take that stress, kind of good stress, if you will, to then put a plan in place and to move towards action, which will move through stress and through the pressure to your overall accomplishments as well.
Absolutely. And one last comment, and then we will move on. And so there's a comment about local culture versus organizational culture, and it's spot on, okay? If you go through this list of discretionary effort, the only place where we really see the organizational culture having the strength of impact is in the commitment to stay with the organization. And so there might be some, moral or ethical kinds of things that the company's engaging in, but by and large, I love the comment, it's very local. It's the leader, it's the leader, it's the leader, it's the leader. So the first four things talk about the leader. Then, do I like my job? Does the coach support me? So then it becomes a little bit more about me. So my leader and me are really the largest impact here. So let's dig into your presentation, Kevin. So tell us how motivation matters and what you found out.
Yeah, and I think what I'll start with is really what drove me to the research and to the concept of, how does motivation impact talent, and how can you as a sales leader make an opportunity to take your best opportunity on performance, if you will, for your overall team. And it really started, Peggy, with a book that you introduced me to 10 plus years ago, called Talent is Overrated by Jeff Galvin. It's an unbelievable kind of perspective of, is it talent or is it the work you do to create your success? And the real kind of key theme coming out of that is it's around deliberate practice, and 10,000 hours of deliberate practice will get you to excellence and drive your high level of success. And you can see that in sports, you can see it in business. You look at the Michael Jordans, the Tiger Woods, the Kobe Bryants of the world. These are the folks that continue to practice. They focused on what their goal was, and they had deliberate practice, not just, hey, I'm going to go out and hit a couple balls and take a few shots. It's putting yourself outside of a comfort zone to look at, I'm going to practice as if it's game day. And the same thing in the business world. You look at a Bill Gates or Warren Buffett. These are folks that deliberately read on an ongoing basis about their business, about other industries that impact their businesses as well. But they're deliberately spending time on themselves to get better. And that book really, to me, drove to what is it that drives the motivation? Because in order to have 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, you better be motivated to, one, enjoy what you're doing, but also want to be able to do that on an ongoing basis. And that led to my work and my thesis around motivation and motivation matters. If you click that next slide, Peggy, what I'll talk about is the methodology and the objectives I hit on, some of the findings, and then also the recommendations for coaching around motivation. So hit that next slide for me real quick. The research itself, and I'll give you the kind of the research question I was looking at, which is, our top producers, and I looked in the financial services space, so our top producers motivated differently than mid-level producers, and can leaders coach differently to motivate their sales organizations? And so I looked at multiple insurance companies that had lines of business from asset management to insurance to annuities to 401ks. So I was looking at cross-industry financial services sales professionals. So I was in focus specifically on wholesalers and sales professionals. I viewed a top wholesaler as someone that was the top 25% of sales on a year-by-year basis, not by percent to goal, not by any other metric other than just hard tonnage of sales. The mid-level wholesaler I looked at, someone between 25 and 75%. And the wholesalers that I focused on were those that had been in the business for on average about 15 to 20 years. So they'd been consistent top performers or consistent mid-level performers, and dove into some semi-structured interviews to really get a real good sense of what their view of motivation, what's driven their motivation over the years. So if you click to that next slide, can you hit that next one?
I'm trying. It's not.
I hear you.
Is this it? Okay.
So through the work and through the research I came through, there was 4 key themes. And these are the key themes: financial incentives, drive to win, aspirational goal setting, and consistency. So what does that mean? You think about sales professionals. Everyone says you're in sales, you must be driven by the dollar. And the reality is, when I talk to mid-level or top producers, financial incentives and money was a top motivator. What I found very interesting is when you went one level below that, is to understand why was money important to them. And as I talked to top producers, it was not just one top producer. Every single top producer I talked to said they were looking to have kind of that level of financial security that was able to have a stockpile of dollars set aside for a safety net and for reserve and for the long-term futures, what they were looking and why money was important to them and why their success from a financial standpoint motivated them. But when you talk to mid-level producers, it was very different. Money still motivated them, but it was motivation from, can I pay a mortgage? Do I pay for a boat, a country club, a college tuition, something that was very short-term in nature, and the financial incentives motivated to drive that lifestyle versus having a security and a safety net to win, a safety net for the future. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic of the difference between top and mid-level. Then you take that one step further to a drive to win. They were driven, the drive to win kind of separated, to me, the top and the mid-level producers. Top producer, this is what I found through the research, is a top producer wanted to be number one. Not only did they want to be number one in their firm, they wanted to be number one in their industry, they wanted to be number one in their territory. So their drive was to be a top producer. The mid-level producers, their drive was to not be last. Their drive was to not be on the bottom. And it was, how do we stay under the radar? It was, I want to be able to just not be called out for being on the bottom. It was just a very stark difference of, do you want to be number one or not last? And it is the difference between mid and top. And what I also thought interesting is the drive to win there was a nuance in the mid-level producers. What they saw as winning and being successful was having a full calendar and having the ability to say, hey, my calendar's full. I had a great week. Where a top producer says, I had a great week. I met with a couple folks and drove and was able to drive sales results. And so that nuance is kind of an interesting nuance as you talk to and kind of coach that mid-level versus top producer. Third was aspirational goal setting. As I looked at top producers, when you ask them, what's your goal? And they said, what do you mean, what's my goal? Is my goal the firm goal? Well, the firm goal is not really my goal. My goal is significantly higher. They set significantly higher goals, and their organization or their firm would set or their sales manager would set for them. Where you ask about goal setting for a mid-level producer, they may say something like, oh, I hit my goal last year. I mean, I missed the firm goal, but I hit my goal because my firm goal is way too high. And so there's the nuance of top producers that look at, their personal goal is significantly higher than any goal the corporation sets for them. And the mid-level is really not, is giving an excuse of why that goal is too high, and they reset and kind of put themselves in another goal category. But that also drives to long-term versus short-term as well. The top producers, what I found, were setting 3 to 5 year personal goals, such as maybe accomplishing something like a CFP or a designation where they could really learn and get better in their craft, where mid-level producers never really looked out a year or 2 years out to set longer-term personal goals. And then the final piece is consistency. What I also found is, regardless of where they fell today, mid-level versus top, they had the same level of motivators throughout their 15 to 20 year careers. Their motivators maintained consistently over the course of their career. So it was very, as you find someone young in their career, you're looking at sales. If their driver for motivators kind of matched that of a mid-level producer, they probably are. You're not going to be able to change their motivation, but yet you're going to be able to know that individual probably will be a mid-level producer over the course of their career.
The end. Okay, so Kevin, so many things are racing through my mind, okay, in what you just shared with us. So I'm going to go back to that slide, and certainly those of you that have questions, weigh in, because I think about, okay, we're talking specifically about salespeople, but this applies to everyone. When you think about, when people, the financial reward, is it, prevention or promotion? Your people were the prevention people, like building the safety net versus the promotion of, oh, let's just go do it and live for another day. And this drive to win and aspirational goal setting, I think it goes back to what Zelda was asking about good stress. The drive to win felt like good stress, okay? They weren't so focused on the outcome. Nobody was judging them. There was a certain amount of uncertainty, but they were kind of getting, some, really good feelings from the uncertainty. Maybe I can, the optimism piece, right? And then your last comment about consistency. And I didn't put this in my questions that I was thinking about. So it's iterative, okay? So when you think about that consistent middle performer, what are your thoughts about helping them move just slightly forward instead of staying in the middle performance? What would be in that gap between middle and high performance in terms of what we can do as coaches?
Yeah, and I think that's really the crux of where I wanted to be able to come away with through this research is, how do you take that middle performer, which any sales organization will have middle performers, right? I mean, it's just, you're always going to have someone in the middle. How do you coach them differently? And how do you set them up for success so that they can, maybe they're at the 50th percentile, how do you move them up just a little bit, 5%, 10% above that? And what I looked at in talking to mid-level performers and talking to other coaches has been this, which is, think about aspirational goal setting. A lot of it is mid-level performers were never involved in the goal setting process. So how do you then bring in, as a coach and as a leader, to bring that associate in to really get a sense of where their mind is before you just throw a number at them of, hey, we need 100 million from you this year, to gain that buy-in, to be able to give them the data, the information to show what the true opportunity is in their territory, to then help them really kind of foresee what they really are able to accomplish. And now they're tied in a little bit more in that ability to say, you know what, I set my own goal, but if I'm working with my manager and my leader, we're working together to set up maybe a little bit higher goal than they'd set for themselves. And so that's one aspect. And the second is that drive to win aspect that I talked a little bit about, having a full calendar. As a leader, how can we utilize our tools and resources, technology, to help a mid-level producer not be busy for the sake of being busy, but using data analytics to say, here's the right advisor to talk to at the right time with the right message. And if we can help, because they need that more, what I've seen is they need more framework, they need more focus. And as sales leaders, can we put that framework in place for them that allows them to be busy, but now all of a sudden you're busy with the right people to have better outcomes as well?
I love that. And, as you were talking, I was thinking about, the intended change theory and how this works, whether it's a sales role or an operations role or whatever role it is. But the intended change theory from Dr. Boyatzis at Case Western says, what's the ideal state? What do I want from myself? Okay. And so it sounds like, middle performers tend to stay in what's real and just stay real. And this is okay. But what's my dream? What's my aspiration? Where do I want to go? And then the coach and the leader helps build the plan. What are the strengths? It's like you said, how can we leverage the tools and technologies that we have available to get you there, and then, kind of pull back on the gaps. So I love that connection and how we can connect it to intended change theory. So we're going to move on so we can get through everything. So one of the things, this was supposed to be in your other one, so we'll get into the cycle of excellence and maybe come back to that slide. So this is from Hollowell, and I love Hollowell's research because he's done all of his work. The majority of his work's been around ADHD and distractions. And so he's a brain guy. So his article for Harvard Business Review was talking about, how we use our brain to think differently about what is that cycle of excellence. And so these are no-brainers. This is a reminder, are we really talking about these things, and are we thinking these things? So what he starts off with is saying, select the right task. We'll go back to the antecedents of discretionary effort. Am I doing the job I like to do? Is the job a right fit? So often, and Kevin, we've had tons of these conversations where people get to their mid-40s and they go, I don't want to do this anymore. Why did I even think I wanted to do it? Something has shifted. And by the way, my conversations with people right now is there's been a huge shift as people have slowed down and had time to reflect. So a lot of people are asking themselves, is this the job I want to do for the next 20, 25 years? So am I doing the right task? Questions like, what am I best at doing? What do I like doing? What do I wish I was better at? What talents do I have that I haven't developed? Look at Gallup Strengths Finders and look at those strengths that you have and say, have I invested in them? What are you most proud of? When what's your legacy? When you get done with your career, what are you going to be most proud of? What do people say that your strengths are? So what's the reflection from outside, and what does it look like coming in? What do you dislike doing? That's another, bottom of the strengths. Are you doing things you really don't like doing that aren't suited to you? So right off the bat, to be excellent, you have to be doing what you love doing. It comes back to intrinsic motivation. It comes back to the antecedents. So we're going to tie this together. And then it's the connection. So go back to the culture and the work environment. Am I able to connect with my colleagues? And do I enjoy being with them? Am I on the right team? I might love the work. I might not like the team. So do I have to ask myself, am I on the right team? So I love this play with problems, because most people who are highly structured and they hear the word play, they go, whoa, we're not at work to play. And it reminds me that what I wanted to add to deliberate practice, Kevin, because we had that conversation this week, is that the last line for deliberate practice isn't fun, okay? Because you're really doing work. It is work. But when we come back to play with problems, what he's talking about is flow. He's talking about Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow, and how when we are engaged in doing what we love doing, there is a playfulness of it because it doesn't feel like work, okay? And I'm going to tie that back to Zelda's question, good stress, bad stress. If we're in flow and there's a lot going on, and it could be a lot of stress, it could be a demand being made upon us, but we could be okay with it because we're in flow. Do we grow from challenges? Okay, do we grapple and grow, or do those challenges take us out? Okay, And finally, where are we in being acknowledged in terms of our achievements? And this goes right back to the Gallup 12, that we've been recognized for our work and our leaders investing in it. So if we looked at those other antecedents, now we're looking more at the person, the self, and saying, am I doing the things I love doing? Am I on the right team? Do I love the work with the colleagues that I have and the organization? Am I able to get into flow when I'm doing my work? Do I see challenges as growth opportunities, or are they taking me out? And I'm able to shine and become recognized for what I do. So question and answer very quickly so we can get through everything, but I had a question for you. So Kevin, how did shining, I want to talk about grapple and grow. How did grapple and grow influence the difference between high performance and middle performance?
You know, if you look at kind of the grapple and grow of like, are you working with a problem or you're not? What I found, you know, not only through performers and the individuals I've coached in the past, but also you know, some of the things I've seen just across the industry and through coaching, has been winners tend to focus on goals and targets, where survivors focus on threats. So it's the ability to say, are you focusing on, you know, what the goal is, and are you going after it and moving forward? Or are you looking at that same kind of problem and grappling with it as a threat, and you're just trying to survive? Really can make a big impact on your overall level of success and how, you know, the mindset that you approach that with.
Right. So thrive or survive. I'm going to remember that. I'm stealing that from you, Kevin. Okay. It's going to be part of mine. So anybody who knows me knows that I'm fascinated with the brain. And I really believe that we as coaches can help people leverage what we know about the brain to be more effective. And so this work comes from Berkman on goals and behavior change, but we're going to talk about it as it relates to motivation. Okay. And so he's talking about how hard it is for people to change behavior, which motivation comes in at the bottom, if you see that, okay? So we're looking at 4 quadrants. I love 4 quadrants. Everything in life is 4 quadrants, right? DISC, you know, situational leadership, you know, the things that we look at, but it kind of helps us understand it, right? So if something is easy, but there's a required level of skill that you have to pay attention to. For example, navigating to a familiar place. You might have to navigate. There might be some complexity around that navigation, but it feels easy because you've been doing it, okay? So then we look at, you know, we're on the level of skill is complex. So when I think about it feels hard and more level of skill, so if it's complex, novel, think about driving in a country that they drive on the other side of the road. Okay, that is hugely complex because our brains have to get engaged to do it, okay? Now we look at, if we come down into the lower left quadrant and we look at the knowledge and ability is necessary, but it is a simple routine. So maybe it's walking to the mailbox. We do that all the time. We know how to do it. It's pretty easy. And then, you know, if we look at knowledge and ability over feeling a little bit hard, it might be changing a diaper for the first time, and it might feel hard because we don't want to do it. So feeling hard can also be about desire as much as something new that we have to do. So motivation is required when something feels hard and it's complex, and even if it's new and novel. So if we look at, you know, the questions we have to be asking ourselves from a motivational perspective, and we should always be in this space. Does the coachee have the skills? Does the person we're talking to have the skills? Does the person we're leading? Is the barrier to change a lack of skill or will? Okay, so when we think about skill and will, what's the desire in these complex and new experiences? You know, our brains like to do exactly what they've always done because it takes less energy. Making change means we got to do more. And so that's what makes it feel hard to our brain. And where does the person trying to move? So, and what do you have to help them with as they try to move? So when we look at motivation, if the person lacks motivation, how can we create a desirable desirable outcome for the person, going back to looking at intended change theory, what's the ideal state? So is that ideal state a desirable outcome, or am I motivated to not get in trouble? So kind of going back to prevention promotion. Do I want to go forward, or do I want to keep myself from getting in trouble? So the other place is, does a person lack motivation? Are they unmotivated or highly motivated to a different goal? You know, I'm not motivated to go visit that person who gives me a crap all the time, even though the analytics are saying this guy could do a lot of business. I'm not motivated because it's so much pressure when I talk to them. Okay. So thinking about motivation, we're unmotivated, or we want to do something else. Okay. Do we lack the skills? So, you know, skills are important here. So the level of skill impacts, do we have interpersonal ability? And can we take a perspective of the skills we need? So can we decide for ourselves what we need? And are we stuck with low skills? Are we stuck in yesterday? And let's talk about being stuck in yesterday so we can make sure we get through the slides. So one of the things that Berkman talks about is motivation is tied to the past. Motivation is based on how we have learned and how our brain works. And, you know, if you read any of the brain science, it talks about neurons that fire together, wire together. So motivation is tied to what our past success has been. And so one of the things that Berkman and everyone now in the habit literature are saying, you have to do small steps. You have to do small steps because your brain has wired together your past performance. So new steps take the energy, and you have to do them slowly. Here's the big thing. We have to leverage for motivation. The person has to identify with the thing they're trying to do. Does it represent their core values? Does it represent their sense of self? And if it doesn't, our identity is susceptible to framing, reconstrual, and subtle influences. So what does that mean exactly? Is our identity is tied to what we're currently doing. Can we identify with that new behavior? So when I think about, a lot of you know my background has been in sales. When I think about a new sales process, my identity is in the salesperson I was using the old process. So now I have to see myself in a new identity of using the new thing or using the new tool, or think about it in any organization. When I introduce a new tool, a new technology, my identity is rooted in what I used to do. So we talked about promotion versus prevention. Am I going ahead, or do I want to stay safe? And then, you know, this one was really big for me. Am I focused on achieving or mastery? You know, so am I trying to go beyond, like Kevin's group and those high performers, or am I just trying to get good at what I do? And keep in mind that mastery is really about intrinsic motivation. So achievement can be both and, but mastery is most often about internal and intrinsic motivation. So what do we do to increase motivation? So we got to remember that the old behavior has been rewarded and the new has not. So how are we going to reward? Think of all the ways we can, you know, get that deeper with a person. We amplify the value. What's in it for you? We talk about this all the time. What's in it for you to do something new? What's the value of the old? It's not taking you where you want to go. So we've got to really make sure we're amplifying new, reducing value of old. We can, you know, obviously monetary incentives work. Okay, they really work with people, and Kevin's research proves that. But sooner or later, the monetary incentives can't continue to increase without something else changing. So one of the things I look at is the identity interventions. And I think this is huge for us as coaches. And that is, how do we identify with a new behavior? So instead of, you know, I eat healthy, I am a healthy eater. Instead of I produce at work, I am a producer. When we put I am with what the value is, it becomes my identity. The difference between saying I voted today and I am a voter, big. Conversely, on saying I cheated, you know, at work, or, you know, I cheated on my taxes versus I am a cheater is big. It really impacts the person. So how can we think about the identity interventions with being a verb, I am, versus I do, and then the low cost, modest in scope, and it's scalable. So what I want to leave you with, because we're at the top of the hour, is to come back to what we've been talking about today and think about from a perspective of this I am piece and amplifying the new and reducing the old. And we have one question that I'm going to get in before we stop, and that is, Kevin, given the firms you've worked with and given your findings so far, is there something that stands out to you where firms fail top performers? So where are we failing the top performers?
Yeah, I would say this. There's probably two areas where we have, not we, but like, individual firms have failed top performers. And that would be recognition and the why. And so let me kind of explain to why. From a recognition standpoint, you have, this whole culture now of everyone gets a trophy. You got everybody out there gets a trophy, gets rewarded for what they do. Well, it really diminishes the top producer from a standpoint of, well, if I am the number one producer, but yet the bottom producer also got the same recognition, same reward, why am I doing that? And so being able to recognize and to provide trophies and recognition where I guess rewarded or where they actually earned it makes a big impact. It makes a big difference. And so putting in different recognition for different producers and different expectations, but to really recognize the top producers for their effort and for their results. And the second is the why. And that why comes down to, I think from a strategy standpoint, it also comes down to decisions that are made. Top producers tend to be very vocal, very outgoing, and say, hey, this is what we should do. And they expect the organization to do that. But yet in reality, you can't always do everything every top producer wants to do. So being able to have a true explanation of the why, and firms that don't provide the why, I think truly do fail top performers, where you'll see top performers that if they don't understand why their suggestion or why the strategy of the firm changed, you'll see them leave and find somebody else that they can believe in what their why or the purpose of the next organization is. So I think from firms that fail top producers, I do think that the two that come to mind for me are just explaining the why on a regular basis and recognition for the purpose.
Kevin, thank you. And thank you so much for being so gracious. And thank to the participants. I know we've gone over a couple of minutes, but I did want to get that last question in because I think it's really important. Next week, we'll be talking about the coach-selling connection and how they interrelate in terms of how that influences sales. But think about, we're all in sales, okay? So don't think if don't have a sales role, this won't be important to me. It is important. We're all in sales. So how do we talk to each other from a coaching perspective? And then on May 29th, we're going to talk about resilience. And we're going to talk about it from a perspective of what are the scales, what's going on with self from a resilience perspective, what's going on with the leader from a leader perspective, and what's going on with the organizational resilience. So it's going to be an exciting time for us to talk about resilience. Don't forget to go look for our blog, Communities of Practice and Thought Leadership. And I'll see you back here next Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern. And again, Kevin, awesome to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your good information. I really appreciate it. And thank you to the attendees.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.